I just don't have that much of an attachment to Pokemon. I've played some of the games as a kid, watched the show when it was on Cartoon Network. Some designs I like. Pokemon Go as a game is fun. You know, I don't hate it, but I'm not able to get into Pokemon as much as some other people can. I was ready to roll my eyes at all these famous Pokemon creepypastas as a result, but they actually surprised me with how tasteful they were. Yeah, tasteful. That's the word I'm gonna use. A lot of them are like articles you'd find on the cutting room floor, and for 2011, that's a pretty good way to get across a believable story about a creepy hidden thing in a game. Or an eerie song. Lavender Town Syndrome is an urban legend based on the original version of the Lavender Town song from Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. Kids who listened to the song were said to have taken their own lives, or experienced other negative side effects, like anxiety and depression. This is because of tones that only children are able to hear. Once an online user put the song through a spectrogram, they found some eerie images. Clearly none of it is real, but the matter-of-fact way it's written gives it a shred of believability. There were ways to disprove it, but most people were too lazy to track down Japanese newspapers to see if this was even slightly true. It also does have some basis in reality, not the song or the spectrogram or any of that. I'm sure we all know about the Porygon episode of the original Pokemon anime, the seizure-inducing lights. Even in the West, people knew about it. It was on The Simpsons, dude. It's similar enough to what's described in the pasta for people to be like, oh, I remember that. Buried Alive is very similar. Like the previous, it's not really a story, more written like a Did You Know Gaming video. So this guy was originally going to be a boss in Pokemon Red and Green, and would have had really weird dialogue about wanting to eat the player and stuff. If the player lost to this Buried Alive character, not only would there be a sprite of the main character getting eaten by it, but it would download the Buried Alive image onto the Game Boy's internal memory and display it on the startup. So no matter what game you played, you'd see this upon booting up your Game Boy. Even though the sprite of the player being eaten by Buried Alive is something Nintendo would never put in the game, there's nothing supernatural. Buried Alive doesn't come out of the screen and kill the player IRL or anything. You aren't gonna have to suspend your disbelief too much, even less than Lavender Town. Misfortune.gb, while not specifically a Pokemon creepypasta, is close enough to one, the evil game in question being found in certain copies of Pokemon Red, among other Game Boy games. It has a similar effect on people to Lavender Town. The author even claims that the Lavender Town myth was based on this game. That's cool. It's that matter-of-fact tone that sells the whole thing, and not from the perspective of a player who buys it at a garage sale and then is driven mad by the contents, until the ending where the author writes about his friend who played the game and, you know, things happen, which I like to think was added by someone on the wiki because it clashes with the rest of it. I'd have no trouble believing it wasn't part of the original. Pokemon Creepy Black keeps with the theme of having barely any supernatural content, but follows the cliche formula of the main character getting a mysterious bootleg Pokemon cartridge. Alongside the 3 starter Pokemon, he gets a Pokemon called Ghost that can curse people, basically killing them. This even affects trainers who disappear from the game map. After using this ghost Pokemon to cheese the game, there's an extra bit added to the ROM hack where the player character, now an old man, is cursed by Ghost, and it shows a slideshow of all the Pokemon and people he killed. It's interesting. Again, this is still all in the game. The actual author character is fine after. It's very likely that this Creepy Black game is a ROM hack in the universe of the story. The author flat out says it, and doesn't imply there's a ghost in the game or whatever, but the game itself is creepy enough. The scares are meant to come from the existential dread, not blood and gore in a pixelated children's game. Unlike Pokemon Lost Silver. Nuh-uh. It's not the worst story I've ever read, but it is so boring. Falls into the trap of not being good, but not bad enough to have anything to talk about. I presume it came out early in the haunted game scene, so I could forgive it for being generic, but I won't. All the author does is describe the game in detail, and all that happens is there's death and mutilation and creepy messages in his alphabets. I mean unknown. If the author liked Pokemon and wanted to write a gold and silver pasta for the hell of it, then that's great for them, but I don't get anything out of it. I am in no way ranking these with the way I choose to talk about them, but Lost Silver deserves to be last, because it's not worth your time unless you're nostalgic for it. Hypno's Lullaby I looked up and I found out it was a cringy edgelord poem song thing and not a story, so I clicked off. I guess that one's the worst. Get out of here, you. Pokemon pastas, most of them I guess, aren't really stories. They're more urban legends, which I think are just as cool. A running theme is that I like when things are mysterious. I'm not the biggest Buried Alive fan now, but I'm gonna walk away with a little more appreciation for these than I previously had.